They love to be called rabbis. They love to be called father. They love to be called whatever, their title and their position, the president or the pastor, or, they love these titles that men put upon them. They just love to hear those things. But Jesus said, don't call each other rabbi, because there's only one master, and that's Christ. Okay, and you're all brethren. We're all equals. The guy that may have the position is no different than you or me. The only difference between one man and another is which one's keeping the commandments, which one's not. If you're keeping the commandments and teaching other people to do so, I don't care what position or station you have in life, you are greater in the kingdom of heaven than the Pope. I'll tell you that right now. Or the president of your church, or the pastor of your church. If you're doing it and they're not, you're greater than them. All right? But otherwise, we're all equal. All right? Those who keep the commandments are all equal to everybody else who's keeping the commandments. And in one way of saying, all those who are not keeping the commandments are equal to all those others that are not keeping the commandments, and they're all going to where. Okay. And don't call people father. The word pope means father. Just calling himself the Pope is saying, like, I'm breaking the commandment here because I expect you to call me father. And priests being called fathers and stuff like that. They said, and we only have one Father, which is our Father in heaven. All right? But he that is greatest among you shall be your servant. If you want to be great, then be servant. And whosoever exalts himself shall be abased, and whosoever humbles himself shall be exalted. Okay, so then Jesus is saying, well, woe unto you, because you're not entering into the kingdom of heaven, and you shut the door on others. It was like me being excommunicated. They don't have the kingdom of heaven. They weren't doing what they were needed to be doing. So supposedly by excommunicating me from the church, they closed the door on me. They weren't going to let me go in either. See? No, we're going to cut you off from the church. We're going to cast you out so that you cannot have the kingdom of heaven. Well, it didn't work because the kingdom of heaven is not governed by men. The kingdom of heaven is governed by God, and you do what is righteousness in the eyes of God, not what is righteousness in the eyes of men. But in Jesus' day, here were the scribes and the Pharisees, and Christians that were following Jesus got kicked out of the synagogue. They were turned away from the religious community because they followed Jesus. And then the idea of devouring widows' houses. They want property for some reason or another, and they figure out some way to steal it from widows. Her husband died, and the inheritance. They were finagling the inheritances so that the inheritance ended up property of the leadership, right? And the widows got turned out into the street. I've heard of the same thing happening. A church wants a certain property for who knows what reason, and they figure out some way to steal it from the widow, legally, and take over properties and stuff. They do the same things today they did in ancient times. For pretense you make long prayers, therefore ye shall receive the greater condemnation. They're constantly in these prayers that are the prayers of hypocrites. And so because they know about prayer, but they're not actually utilizing prayer properly, they bring to them the greater condemnation. And so then we're talking about the missionaries. They'll go out and they'll search land and sea for a new proselyte, somebody new to come into their church or into their organization, and then they end up making the new guy 10 times worse than they are. Okay, because they, from the beginning, from the get-go, they're teaching them their false doctrine. he talks about swearing. And it doesn't matter by who or by what you swear. It's foolishness to swear. Just because you swear by something holy or sacred doesn't mean you're going to do it. And a lot of them didn't. Okay. So we've already talked about swearing. Okay, verse 23. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have omitted the weightier matter of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. These ought ye to have done, and not to leave the other undone. So he's not saying don't pay your tithes and don't he's not saying don't pay your tithes, because the tithe is a necessary part of the kingdom of God, because you always got poor. Okay, and the tithe is for the poor, and you've always got tithe, so you still pay your tithes. Okay, but before paying tithes, let's talk about the weightier matters about judgment, making just judgments, and having mercy. Okay, you recognize, it's like the parable of the king and the man that owed him $10 million, and he didn't have it to pay, so he begged for mercy. Okay, so the king, did good judgment. Okay, but he was also merciful, forgave the guy the debt. But then when the guy that owed his master $10 million, and he had a fellow servant that only owed him $10,000, the servant didn't forgive his fellow servant, and so the original judgment that should have fallen upon the man that owed the $10 million fell upon him, and he was punished. Okay, it's the same kind of thing. These are the things that we need to pay attention to: judgment, mercy, and then faith. More important, or put those types of things ahead of the tithes. Ye blind guides would strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. Okay, there were two things that you weren't supposed to eat. You weren't supposed to eat gnats, and you weren't supposed to eat camels. Okay, and so they would run water through a strainer to make sure that you weren't going to be drinking any gnats, but secretly they were going out and killing camels and eating camel meat. Okay, so you strain at a gnat, which is a small thing, but you're still eating camels. But it was just to give an idea. They were nitpicky about the little laws, but yet they broke the big laws. Okay. So then Jesus talks about cleaning the outside of the vessel. And this is so much about, or so necessary today. So many people, they put on this really good show. They find fancy clothes and they put on a good show of righteousness. They're going through all these great motions of righteousness. But inwardly, they're full of dead men's bones. They're like whited sepulchres, right? You look beautiful on the outside, but inwardly are dead men's bones. The outside of the plate and the platter is clean, but the inside is filthiness, and you're just eating filthiness to eat out of the plates, to use the utensils and plates that they were using. And then they said, well, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have killed the prophets. But they do. They do. If a righteous man comes and declares to them their unrighteousness, they'll kill him again. If we wouldn't have done it to those guys, but yeah, we'll do it to these guys. And they did. And anyway, so I'm going to leave it off there. You can finish reading the rest of chapter 23.